If you're excited to chase lake trout on Fort Peck this ice season, I got good news for you. Number one, lake's about to be freezing over soon. Number two, I'm about to share some of my top tips on locations, tactics, and tackle to help you put some of the biggest, gnarliest lake trout topside this ice season. First off, location. Location for catching big, gnarly lake trout on Peck. If you're not around big fish, you can't catch big fish. When it comes to chasing lake trout through the ice on Peck, you can kind of catch them almost anywhere. Really shallow to deep, one end of the lake to the other. That being said, you're going to have high percentage areas. The prime area to be targeting lake trout on Peck is pretty much going to be the east half of the lake in the main arm and the dry arm. Everything from like Snow Creek to the dam and pretty much the majority of the dry arm. If you're adjacent to 70 foot of water or deeper, you're probably going to be in some prime areas for big lake trout. Now, when it comes to like more of the details on locations, there's a lot of variability in some of the spots that I've caught big fish, but on average, you're looking for complex structure. To me, some of the stuff that I'm looking for isn't small, isolated things. It's big, complex structures with big feeding zones, particularly those that are stair-stepped, that either have cover on them or are adjacent to good cover. By stair-stepped, you might have a really good legend. 10 foot, 30 foot, 60 foot, 90 foot, 120 foot. Now when it comes to the depths that you're targeting them, the prime depth zones that I like on Peck in the winter is probably like that, 50 to 90 foot range. That being said, you can occasionally be a little bit shallower, a little bit deeper. But yeah, kind of that 50 to 90 foot range is kind of the key depths that I'm chasing them in. However, it seems that having that distinct stair-stepped ledge all the way from shallow to even deeper than you're targeting them can be advantageous. Now when it comes to cover, something that you'll find is like on these stair-step structures, the more distinct the drop between one ledge and the next, the higher the likelihood that you actually have rock on the face of that drop. It's very common on Peck to have rock right on the face of that drop, which can make a really good ambush point and help hold bigger than average lake trout on Fort Peck. Also, when it comes to cover, the interesting thing is whether or not there's a lot of cover on the spot that you're fishing, it seems that if you're adjacent to a lot of shallow cover in that, 30, 20 foot range, etc., it seems like it still helps up your percentages of big lake trout out deep. So timing is also one of the really important things on Peck. The difficult thing is the timing can change day to day. But on average, I would say the key bite windows on Peck is more of just a daytime thing. Mid-morning, mid-afternoon, and sometimes evenings are very good. I'd say my least favorite time to fish lake trout on Peck is early mornings. Seems like that when that sun first gets high, kind of mid-morning is a really good window. And then when that sun just kind of gets just a smidge lower, kind of mid to late afternoon, can be really good. And it'll sometimes extend into the evening towards sunset. If you do have a moon, like a full moon, and you have moonrise happening at sunset, that can be a money situation for big lake trout. I've one of the biggest lake trout I've seen through the ice, and my personal biggest lake trout in open water came when the moon was rising and the sun was setting. It was like the day before the full moon. Now on to some tactics. When it comes to tactics, ultimately, even catching little lake trout I think will help up your odds of bumping into a big lake trout, because hooking and fighting and landing little lake trout causes a lot of commotion to help draw lake trout in. Then you can get some big girls in to then possibly catch them. That being said, what I have found to be the best scenario to catch big lake trout through the ice on Peck is to try to force and look for high riding fish. When it comes to finding high riding fish on Peck, maybe you're in 70 foot of water and you're looking for fish that are 10, 20, 30, 40 foot down over 70 foot of water. My personal favorite tactic to do that is a lot of times, even if I'm doing some hole hopping, a lot of times I'll pop 3 holes. I don't necessarily, it depends how much hole hopping I'm doing, but a lot of times I'll drop 3 holes. One to put a transducer in, one to put a line in that's near the bottom, and one to put a line in that might be 15 foot down over 70 foot of water. I like to cover all areas of the water column, and more often than not, the biggest fish that I'm catching that day comes through high, and a lot of times is attracted to that high line that I have just dead stick there, or just while I'm working the entire water column, making note and paying attention, looking for those high riding fish, because a lot of the biggest, gnarliest, like these really big, dark, actually male lake trout are up real high and can make for some sick, like, just watching them come in, watching them eat, and then seeing those like big gnarly looking fish. A really, really cool experience. So look for those high riders. That is a very important tactic on Peck. Well, I'll say 90% of the fish you're catching, if not more, are going to be near the bottom. A lot of those big girls or big males are up real high in the water column, so keep an eye out for them. So when it comes to tackle, a lot of different great rods out on the market. This happens to be an Elliot 46-inch heavy fast. What I like about this rod, it's got enough power to jig the baits that I'm usually jigging on Peck, but it still has good flex into the rod. It's a fast rod, but it still gives into the backbone. So it's flex, so you have a lot of rod to play the fish. The last thing you want is a rod that only is very tippy only and shuts down too early. If it shuts down too early in the backbone, you have very little rod to play the fish with. This is a 46-inch long rod with good flex, but still enough stiffness to work the baits and then to lean in on those big fish as well. The reel that I'm using, this is a Daiwa BG 3000. It's a little bit bigger than most people use, but personally, a bigger reel, you have more power, you have better drag, you have better line management. I think there's not many things you're losing by going bigger. Like I said, this is Daiwa BG 3000, good size reel. My choice of line probably differs from a lot of people. I'm using straight Seaguar Invisics 15-pound fluorocarbon. To me, braid on the spinning reel, especially if it's cold and it's a little bit icy, it sticks to the reel so bad you have to like kind of peel it off by hand or kind of like work it down there. It's very hard to have an unimpeded drop for your bait. And to me, attracting lake trout on that initial drop, or even just like on fish that chase and they give up, a lot of times you can convert those fish by dropping back to them quickly, but you want an unimpeded drop. This fluorocarbon doesn't freeze near as bad as braid, and it'll shoot off the spool really well. In fact, sometimes it shoots off so well you almost have to choke it back a little bit with your hand, so watch for that a little bit. But it'll peel off super quick, so your lure can fall unimpeded at whatever rate that's trying to drop at without having to like rip the line off the spool. To me, that's huge in converting fish, and converting fish is ultimately one of those things that's going to lead you to help getting bigger fish by converting all those fish, not missing any of them. Also, something I think as a general rule, some of these fish are chasing way up in the water column. They might eat 20 foot from the hole. You want give in your setup. This fluorocarbon will help with that. The one thing I'll say is, like, on Peck, we're usually fishing, at least in my experience, I'm fishing usually 90 foot and shallower. Like 90 foot's on the deep end on Peck. A lot of that 50 to 80 foot kind of range. And I think straight 50 to 80 foot of fluorocarbon, you got plenty of power to set the hook, plenty of power to lean on the fish. That's all you need. If you were going to be fishing 120 foot of water or deeper, like, especially like somewhere else, I might consider using braid line, etc. So, but I'll say this, for shallower waters on Peck, 90 foot and shallower, I think straight fluorocarbon is an awesome option. Additionally, a lot of people miss a lot of lake trout on Peck, just anywhere. Lake trout, they slash, you're going to miss some fish. To me, the fluorocarbon, that little bit of give is going to help you just a little bit more in terms of like helping them get the bait. Because a lot of times you're reeling up, they're coming up, and you're kind of like tending to pull the bait away from them as they're trying to eat it. You want to have a delayed reaction. This is going to help you a little bit on that. I think you're actually going to hook up and land more fish with fluorocarbon than you would with braid. So anyways, that's a little bit on my tackle. So when it comes to the business end, one thing I should mention, straight 15-pound Seaguar Invisics fluorocarbon, and I use a size 1 Sampo ball bearing swivel with welded rings. I rarely use swivels ever, except for through the ice. I do because you're just sitting there, you get line twists, and you're trying to hold your lure suspended a lot of times in the water column, and I just don't want it twisting unnaturally too much So I do really like a size 1 Sampo ball bearing swivel with welded rings to a size 1 Nishini Lure Works snap. I'm very picky on my snaps. I really like the size 1 Nishini Lure Works snap. Very strong, very small, very reliable. I love this snap, that ball bearing combination, this rod and reel. Deadly for getting some big ones. I will say, if you were ever using really oversized baits though, this rod works really good with the bait range that I use. A lot of that 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce style baits. If you were going to go really heavy for whatever reason, you might need to step it up in your rod power just a smidge. But I think this rod overall, for your average like lake trout presentations, this is a beautiful setup. So when it comes to lures, the biggest lake trout I have ever caught on Peck literally ate this exact bait. I retired it after it ate it. The very first day I ever used this bait, this is the Nishini Lure Works Simcoe 75 heavyweight. I've caught so many lake trout on this in open water and ice fishing, it's crazy. But yeah, the very first day I ever used this, caught a 38-inch lake trout, and amongst many others. This is one of the best all-around lake trout lures I think you could possibly use, especially through the ice. It's got a fast, kind of like fluttering drop that's very good at attracting lake trout as it's dropping. It triggers them. They will eat it on the drop. They will eat it as you retrieve it up. It's a lipless crankbait. It vibrates on the retrieve up. Also, you can drop it to the bottom and go kind of like blade bait with it, like lift and drop it right off the bottom. Typically, I'm using the front line tie, and when you jig it, it darts, and jumps side to side. It doesn't just vibrate up, it will dart. And this has a way of triggering fish when it's suspended darting on bottom, moving upwards and falling downwards. To me, this is the best all-around lake trout bait you can possibly use. That being said, there's a lot of different options. One thing I have not done a lot, I'd say slim to none on Peck, is upsizing a lot through the ice. I have done it in open water using 6 8-inch long baits, etc. You go even bigger than that. But through the ice, just for practical purposes, I'm usually using standard lipless size crankbaits or 3, 4, 5-inch long baits. On the little bit bigger end, a 5-inch paddle tail like a Kitech Easy Shiner, or a Duo Realis Versa Shad Fat in 5-inch with a 1 ounce Nishini Lure Works Smelt Head Plus head with or without the underspin. You can just take this underspin off. Is a very good little bit larger presentation to get the attention of a little bit bigger lake trout. Like I said, ultimately I think location, being in the right spot in the water column, and timing is going to play more than the size of your bait, but that is something that I should play around with a little bit more myself. So anyways, when it comes to more on the bait details, I'm actually going to show you guys a little clip when I was just about swimming on the ice last year and comparing some of my favorite baits to a Young of the Year Cisco that one of the lake trout had just spit out. The Cisco. That was spit up by one of my fish earlier today. That Cisco, as I mentioned earlier, was born last spring, hatched last spring. They spawn in the fall. They hatch, the Cisco spawn in the fall. The eggs sit under the ice all winter. The Cisco hatch in the spring, and that's the size that they are right now. About 4.5 inches. So that is my go-to lineup of presentations right there. On top, the Nishini Lure Works Simcoe 75 heavyweight. There's different models. The heavyweight is the one that I like. I like to use the line tie. It's on the leading side. That's predominantly what I've been using. Now this is the Cisco that the LAKERS spit up. You can see how closely they resemble a lot of the baits that are kind of my go-tos. The next bait, and by the way, that's just like a, I forget what that's called. Just like the pearl color. Anyways, killer bait year round on Peck. Next in line, the 5/8 ounce Nishini Lure Works Smelt Head jig with a 3.5-inch Kitech Easy Shiner. You can see how similarly that matches up with the Cisco. The color that this jig head is
is Emerald Shiner. Has a little bit of that green in the head and very distinct reflective eyes. A lot like a Cisco. And they tend to, I think it's kind of fading out now that this thing's been chilling on the ice, but the Cisco usually have a lot more green kind of in their backs. So I just add a little tinge of green here. Next is once again the 5/8 ounce Machine Lure Smelt Head jig with a what is it? The 3.5 inch Demiki Armor Shad paddle tail. I forgot to put the box here. Give me just one sec. Okay, here's the package of the Demiki Armor Shad 3 inch. So one thing I really like about the Kitech Easy Shiner is that tail starts activating and paddling almost instantly. Like, arguably better than any soft plastic paddle tail out there, but that Armor Shad, which I just chucked back over here, 3 inch, does a remarkably good job also and is much more durable. You would think that hook is placed a little too far back, the way it's rigged up like that, but really that tail gets a nice little fluttering kick incredibly well. It works very well rigged exactly like that. Also, I mean, all of these presentations are also killer walleye presentations out here in the summer especially. But anyways, that's besides the point. So, next presentation, once again, 5/8 ounce Machine Lure Smelt Head with the drop shot minnow, which is right there. This drop shot minnow and jig head combination darts like crazy. Like, picture like how tubes dart erratically. This is like next level. Really darty, really cool bait. White and blue pearl 3.4 inch. I have that matched up with the Wagasaki jig head. Beautiful combination, seamless, catches fish really well. It's good for darting in place or just slowly reeling up and having them chase it up. Next, and a bait that I really like also, the Rapala Rip and Wrap. Falls quickly, got a little flutter on the fall. I go with the blue chrome a lot of times. Big difference between this and the Simcoe. This has got BBs in it. This is silent. A lot of times if I'm fishing lipless a lot with a couple people, I like to have one person fish one person fish the other. In my experience, these are probably my two favorite lipless for lake trout out here by far. Additionally, something I caught the first lake trout or two on, I think, was actually a 5/8 ounce Machine Lure Smelt Head with an anchovy shad. The Demiki anchovy shad, fantastic. Paddle tail presentation again.